One of the things that Aisha and I found out when we were reading through all of the coaching cycle reports was that a lot of you are supporting a teacher to implement a new routine that involves multiple components. And this is probably because you're doing so much work related to new curricular resources. And so there's a lot of new curricular resources in which they give you a routine for a set of lessons and give you a time frame in which to have those lessons completed. And that's one of the things that you're really helping teachers to master. Now, we're going to use the shared reading part of Bookworms as our example, but these specific routines are in a lot of curricular resources, such as UFly lessons. They have a set of 8 steps in their lessons that are supposed to be done in a certain amount of time, and nobody seems to be able to get them done in that amount of time. If you're doing differentiated reading instruction, the phonics lessons, even if you're not doing Bookworms, they have a set of steps for each type of lesson that needs to be done within a specific period of time. And even many of the core reading series now have lessons that you do over and over across the year that have multiple components. So we think it's important to look at what that looks like because so many of you are doing it and what setting expectations for those kind of teacher practice coaching cycles look like. The shared reading Bookworms gives you a checklist. It has the 7 components for the shared reading lessons, and teachers do these shared reading lessons every single day across the year. So it's an important routine to get into your practice and have you internalize it, right? So they list the 7 practices. They list the minutes that you have for each part of the practice, and they have 2 or 3 look-fors for each of the components. In this case, there's about 20 different look-fors. But you as a coach and the teacher together are going to not only think about, okay, we need to get this in all in the right amount of time, but which of these look-fors are the ones that we think are most important to us as we work with students. So let's look at how you might generate that particular set of expectations for your coaching cycle. It would later transfer to your coaching cycle report. But the most important thing is that you know what those expectations are as you're working together. So we have a sheet here that says expectations for the cycle, activities for each expectation, and how you know they've been met. So of course, if you have this timed routine, one of the things you're really going to focus on is staying within the time frame for each component. By setting out the activities that will help us stay within that time frame, what are we going to do? Well, typically the coach models the entire block and hopefully stays within the time frame while the teacher is doing the checklist and just looking for the minutes, not the content so much. Then they might discuss the problematic components that seem to make it difficult to get everything done within that short time frame. And they work it through. The coach might model again. The teacher would then implement it sometimes, and the coach would observe using the checklist, just looking for the minutes. So you know that this expectation has been met when the coach is recording the amount of time spent on each component, and the teacher stays within that time frame, not just once, because you want them to internalize that time frame. They need to stay on it for at least 3 different occasions. Maybe the first time the teacher does really well, and then you're going on to talk about some of the content. And the second time, maybe one of them gets out of whack a little bit, but maybe at the third time you observe the teacher's back right on the time frame. So I think that sometimes we stop our cycles too early, right when the teacher has done it successfully once. But in these cases with routines, you want them to do it successfully multiple times so that when the cycle's over, they will continue to do those routines within the time allotment. The second thing this coach and teacher decided was that they really wanted to look at that first and second focus and how to model the comprehension strategy. So what are they going to do during their co-planning? They're going to preview the items, the focuses and the strategies, and revise them as necessary. Sometimes those focuses need a little tweak. The coach is often going to model once or twice, and the teacher is going to then do it. And then how do you know if it's been met? Well, the coach is going to take some notes on the look-fors for these particular aspects of the lesson and going to do it on multiple occasions. The other one that the teacher said, some of these questions, I'm just not sure I can get through all of these questions in the amount of time. So during co-planning, you preview the questions and you revise them and you decide which ones you are really going to look at. Again, there's modeling and teacher implementation. And then the coach takes notes on what questions were asked and the follow-up questions. And then there's a section on every student response. Some teachers have a problem with the every student response. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes, we know you have a thumb. And so maybe there are some better every student response than thumbs up, thumbs down. But how do you know? Well, again, the coach's notes on the document show which every student response the teacher asked for and if the students were doing it. So these are maybe 4 good expectations for the cycle that the teacher and the coach have decided on together. The activities help you think about how long that cycle is going to be. And there's really specific ways that things are going to be documented. So the teacher's confident at the end that she or he can continue on using this routine well and do the preparation, him or herself, without the coach. It's always good after the cycle for the coach to come back in a couple of weeks to relook at that routine and make sure it's still in place. In this case, this is a completed checklist with some notes here. And really, when you're looking at the notes, every time you do a checklist like this, you're looking at what's there, so you don't have to focus on it much, but what's not there. Here we had students read chorally, but the coach noticed that several students did not participate. We'll look at the list, see what we could do to make sure that everyone participates in choral reading. And the other area that was problematic was that the teacher asking a series of inferential questions when the coach made a list of the questions and the follow-up felt like there were some issues around were there enough inferential questions? Could have there been more? So in this case, out of the 20, this teacher met the expectations on this particular observation 90% of the time, which is really good, but it's great to set those expectations. And then even though the teacher met the expectations, to know what else needs to be worked on, what are the next steps. So hopefully this shows you how you could use coaching in a routine to make sure that that routine becomes internalized for the teacher. We're going to give you a chance to do this now in your group. And what we would like you to do is think about written response to reading. There are so many curricular resources that ask teachers to have written response to reading. Unfortunately, usually what they say is, give the students this question and tell them to write about it and bring their written work the next day, or we'll share it later. But they don't really take the students through what it means to have a written response, and teachers might not know the steps that they should take to give really explicit instruction to their students about written response to writing. So in this case, there are lots of different types of written responses. You might want to choose, like these and want to include them in your expectations. That personal reflection, like this story or this part reminded me of and why. Sometimes written responses ask for a response to a question, like how are the two characters similar? How are they different? Sometimes they ask you to make an informed prediction. And that's like, okay, given what's happened so far and your knowledge of similar events and your experiences, what do you think is going to happen next and why? So what we would like you to do is say, what expectations would the teacher and coach set to make sure that the teacher feels confident in implementing instruction around written responses? And what would those activities be? And how would you know if the teacher had mastered the skills that you set out under the expectations? So we're going to give you a little bit of time to work in your groups, maybe about, it says 13 minutes, but we're going to give you perhaps 10 minutes. And while you're doing that and filling out the sheet, we'd like the regional coaches to walk around and kind of just eyeball some of those expectations so that when we come back in 10 minutes, you can share a couple of expectations out from your group. So are there questions? Does this sound clear to you? Okay, so you have about 10 minutes. Oh, just form groups of 3 or 4 and together work through at least a couple of expectations, the activities, and how you know they've been met. All right. Are there a few regional coaches who would be willing to share one expectation that was set by one of the groups in your area?
Hi, I'm Dana Jobin from Westford Misaki ISD, and we talked about using writing conferring to deliver specific feedback to the students, which that would be written on their work, and then our notes, and then using those notes to drive instruction.
So under your set of expectations, you had that the teacher would confer with students about their written responses. So that's an assessment piece, right? And what activities would the coach be responsible for? Do you know?
The coach would be responsible for modeling the constructed writing response process, debriefing, and then observing.
Okay. All right. So that really focuses on the assessment. How are you going to continually assess students' written responses? Great. These are just some that you might have written down that maybe mirror what you're saying. So one of the things that you might work on with a teacher is selecting an appropriate response type for a specific portion of the text. You know, what is it that you want the students to think about, and which of those types, personal reflection, a question, a informed prediction, or some other kind of written response that you're used to, would they most likely be appropriate for that particular piece of text? And then you and the teacher are going to think about, okay, how are we going to give explicit explanation of each response type? So you and the teacher are going to kind of develop a list of instructional steps that the teacher can really give to the students, like when you do an explicit response relating to your personal reflection, it might look like this, and these are the components. And then some way to assess. In this case, I know that Bookworms and some others use a rubric to assess students' written responses and then to talk to the students about those. So these are just a couple of ideas. We'll put some others onto the agenda now that you've had the experience of trying it yourself. But these are just a way to think about what are the components that could go in to a good teacher practice cycle, so that you know what you're going to focus on and what it's going to look like at the end. So Asha, we're moving from teacher practice. Hopefully everybody has a better idea of how to specifically state those expectations and what everybody's role is. Asha's going to move on now into student learning.
Thanks, Susan. We are going to take a deeper dive into looking closely at ways that we can strengthen the student learning coaching cycles. And as we prepare for the activity that we're going to do, for regional coaches that are in the room, you would need the next set of handouts, which include scenario A and scenario B of those student learning reports, along with the analysis of the coaching cycle report. And it has a graphic of the phases of the coaching cycle, just to kind of get us ready to go. All right. So as we think about the core components of a coaching cycle, we have had that graphic to really help us identify the core pieces that really help to shift instruction and for us to see an impact on student learning. And so we see, or we find within the coaching cycle report, we have 7 guidelines that kind of helps us to capture a clear picture of what's actually happening in the coaching cycle. First important thing is the grade level and focus area. So we want to make sure that we're naming what grade level is, because then we're able to measure that against grade level expectations, the standards, and thinking more specifically about our kiddos and where they should be, and in comparison to benchmark as well. And then we're thinking about the focus area. You know, we know that many of the essentials overlap, but when we're thinking about that sustained amount of time that we're spending in the coaching cycle, we want to make sure that our focus area is targeted. But we are referring to those core pieces like phonemic awareness or decoding and fluency, comprehension, vocabulary, some of the different areas that we talked about in the opening section of today's presentation. And we can also look at the use of independent routines with students. Are they doing things with support and applying some of those skills that you've taught maybe in small group or in whole group? So we're looking at specific focus areas when we collect the data, because we want to make sure that that's present and we understand what was happening within your coaching cycle. Another thing is the baseline data. It's really helpful that you name the assessment. What did you use when developing your focus, including the baseline data results, and a specific name of that assessment. If that's noted, it really helps us to identify the curricular tool that you might be using, whether it's the informal decoding inventory, benchmark assessments like NWEA, FastBridge, Acadience, whether it's a multi-dimensional fluency scale. You know, so there's different types of assessments that are being used, and we heard today, this morning, about the different types of assessments. So this gives you that space to use some more formative assessments, but it's really helpful when you name that specific assessment. And then not only naming the assessment, but sometimes when we saw data that was maybe represented in a table, it was really clear how many students or percentage of students that were meeting or exceeding expectations at the gathering of that baseline data, are those that might be developing or approaching. Or maybe a table could show how many students fit into a specific category if you have differentiated groups, moving from different phases within their phonics development, that's helpful as well. So just giving a clear picture or snapshot of where the students are at the beginning of the coaching cycle is helpful. And then the goals, the expectations, being able to name explicitly what are you expecting the students to be able to do after or at the end of this coaching cycle, or this time period together. About how many students are you expecting to move from one place to another? By the end of example could be like by the end of the coaching cycle, a certain percent of class will score in the meeting or exceeding category. So we want more explicit language, and that explicit language not only helps us in reading the reports, but it also helps you to be more targeted about your expectations and why as you're looking at your different reports. And then there's a space in the template to be able to name some of those core coaching activities that happen during the implementation phase. So whether you're constantly conferring, but maybe you're co-planning, or you decide as a team that you're going to be modeling, then observing, or doing some co-teaching. Capturing that in the coaching cycle helps us to see that whether or not your time was deliberately focused on some of those core practices that we know shift instruction. And then number 5, the post-instruction assessment results. So, in this section, you could use a similar table showing pre and post assessments, where the students were at the beginning and where they are now at the end of the cycle. But also the sixth part of the report is giving that analysis of the assessment data. So what did you notice? What did you learn about your students in this time frame? Or what did the teacher learn about the students in this time frame? What did you notice about your data at the end? So not a very long, doesn't have to be a long dissertation or anything, but a nice snapshot that you're able to see where they were at the beginning, where they were at the end, and what changes or what growth actually took place. And lastly, number 7 is total number of hours spent. So if you don't have a digital platform in which you're tracking, to have that the template that we have, there's a place for you to record the dates and times that you met together as a team, and the amount of time that you spent. And the more aware you are of your own coaching practices, like for example, coaches, we don't want to spend the bulk of our coaching time doing all the modeling, or the bulk of our coaching time doing all of the observation. But we want to make sure that there's there's a balance of those core coaching activities that are happening throughout the cycle. So I just kind of wanted to hit those 7 guidelines, those key components of the student learning cycle in the report. And now we're going to just take a brief look at 2 different scenarios. The first report A, is a 3rd grade class. And the focus is vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And you'll notice that the assessment there is Acadience Maze, the Acadience Maze assessment. And I do want to share a little bit about the Acadience Maze assessment. It does measure, it's a comprehension assessment. And within that, the student is presented with a reading passage in which some of the words are replaced by a multiple choice box that includes the original word and 2 distractor words. And then the student reads the passage silently and selects the word in each box that best fits the meaning of the sentence. So that was the assessment tool that was used for those targeted focus areas. So when you take a look at, if if you get report A, you take a look at report A, I want you to be looking for, I want you to take a moment, not right now, but when you get into your activity time, take a moment to see, check for those 7 guidelines. Are those 7 guidelines present in the report? What do you notice about the assessment tool that was used? Does the assessment tool align with the focus area? Think about all of those different components that we named that were really important, that will really help us to tell our data story across the state, okay? And then report B. Report B is a kindergarten classroom. And the focus for this report was on vocabulary. And it stated that this particular report stated that the assessment used was the beginning of the unit assessment in vocabulary. The specific curricular resource was not named, but I want you to take a look at the different components within this report as well, and just be thinking about all of those important pieces, the core component pieces of a coaching cycle, and how when we have all of those different components there, it really helps us to see what's happening, a clear picture of what's happening within a cycle. So with that being said, this activity is called Pair Up, Square Up. And with this activity, we're going to ask you to ultimately come together with 4 people in your group. But one pair is going to read scenario A together, and you're going to be looking for those key components that are a part of the coaching cycle. And another pair is going to read scenario B. And you can spend about 5 minutes reading through that report, looking for those core components, thinking about what might be missing and what may need to be strengthened, okay? And then together as a pair or a partner group, if you're reading scenario A, you're going to chart and analyze what's present in the report, what's missing, and get some suggestions for strengthening. What do you think might be some possible suggestions for strengthening this report? So as we begin to wrap up this piece, I know that you had some great conversations and dialogue around what you saw in report A compared to report B. I just wanted to lift some highlights in comparison, and we'll link this comparison chart in your agenda so that you'll be able to refer back to it when you're doing your own work later in the year. But when we think about the beginning, the launch of the coaching cycle report, in both reports, coaches and teachers engaged in meaningful activities to support learning. Report A included co-planning. Well, I think I'm jumping. Let's look at the launch phase first. But report A shows the 3rd grade focus aligned to the standards with clear percentages from the baseline data. And then report B highlights the kindergarten focus tied directly to the essentials with both counts, meaning number of students, as well as percentages of where those students were, all 15 students. Where the two differ is in the clarity of goals. Report A's goals were descriptive, but not as measurable, which makes it a little bit harder to connect results later on. Report B included some measurable expectations, but and that actually makes it easier to see movement across groups when you set those more specific expectations. So the takeaway here is just thinking about both teachers and coaches. They were being intentional about naming the focus and how they collected data, but sharpening goals and trying to be more measurable and ensuring baseline data includes both percentages and student counts can make that launch phase even stronger. And we know that it might vary the different types of reports that you have, but thinking of a way to chart and make sure that those numbers are clear at the beginning helps you to set clearer goals as well. And then
as she goes to the next slide, I just want to touch base with making sure that you feel like the Maze assessment did align with what you were teaching during your coaching cycle. If it didn't, you need to change to a different assessment that actually is aligned to what you're teaching during the coaching cycle.
Yes, thanks for lifting that, Susan, and reminding me to lift that, because a lot of times if your assessment doesn't match your focus area or your focus area is too broad, then it's really hard to track the student growth. So we want to make sure that those assessments are in alignment with the particular focus area that you're working on, right? And then for that implement section and the debrief section, when we're thinking about the core coaching activities during the implementation, in both reports, the coaches and teachers engaged in a meaningful number of activities, but report A only focused on co-planning and they did some co-teaching together. So that report didn't seem as though the coaching cycle was as well-rounded. You might be able to get more information on students and their progress as you change up in those different core coaching activities. Where report B had a wider range of those different coaching activities. Both show post-assessment growth for students, which is a clear indicator that the cycles made a difference, that there was some growth that happened there. One area of growth in report A is that the coaching activities could have been broadened to include all of those different areas, as I discussed before. But one of the key takeaways I wanted to highlight for both of the reports is looking at those coaching hours. So we noticed that report A had about 10 hours and then report B had about 15 hours. So report B also had that breakdown of what was happening within each of those coaching activities. So that gives us a clear, balanced view of the different types of things that are happening within that coaching cycle. So just to be able to name those and to give an analysis around what actually happened, what did you see, how did the growth take place within those coaching cycles are really important to be able to name. So with that in mind, is there anything you want to add, Susan, before we go into our break?
No, except that I think people have often talked about the importance of planning. So the final coaching report is only going to be as good as the amount of planning time that you put into planning that coaching cycle and implementing it. Can't make up things at the end that you actually didn't plan for or do. So really what I think Asha and I are really trying to say is let's really strengthen the planning of our coaching cycles, really look at the implementation, ongoing implementation and assessments so that the final is, does meet the expectations that you set.
So as we prepare to go into one of our last activities of the day, we want to give you some time, some strategic thinking time to think about what your next full coaching cycle will look like. So you've gotten a chance to look at 2 reports, 2 example reports, look at the different components that are key to moving practice forward. So in this next conversation protocol, you're going to get some individual thinking time to begin to think through preparing a full coaching cycle. So you On your handout, it really gives a breakdown of those key components. When you're looking at the launch phase, when you're looking at the implementation, so it has some key questions there for you to think about what type of implementation activities you might engage in with your teacher. Thinking specifically about the teacher that you want to work closely with around a full coaching cycle as well. And even all the way through to the debrief portion of the coaching cycle. What might be some of your expectations towards the end? So there's some guided questions in that handout that we want to give you some time to think through individually. And then you get into small groups, and within those small groups, you'll share. Each person will kind of share out their thinking, but your regional coaches are gonna kind of guide you into how you get into those triads. If you are a coach that's new to coaching or not quite ready to launch a coaching cycle yet, but you're thinking strategically about it, at the bottom of that page, it gives you an opportunity to think about where you are with launching a coaching cycle. Okay, so your regional coach is going to kind of lead you into getting into groups based off of how you feel about entering into a coaching cycle or where you are after you had some individual processing time. Okay, you'll stay in those small groups for about 22 minutes. And then your regional coach will kind of bring you back together for a whole group debrief within your regions. Okay. The clear steps to the protocol are right there at the top of that page, the handout. And we have enjoyed this time with you today across the state. So kudos to all of the regional leads and coordinators and the team that has put things together for our time together today. We will see you in our December quarterly, and have a great time in your regions.